Welcome, Roz.
Welcome,
How are
Norm.
you?
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Amazing. I'm doing amazing. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right. This is what podcast?
Two, three, four. It's the
Yeah,
beginning. We're definitely at the beginning of this whole
yeah. I was thinking about the
adventure.
name.
Yep.
I was thinking about I don't know, podcast amateurs, something like that.
Amateurs for
Could be
sure. Amateurs for sure.
amateurs in podcast. Amateurs. We
So
have
you
to
expanding
go.
beyond the core classical discussions that we have. We're doing a lot more modern stuff these days. So you're
I
going to
mean, these are modern classics, and sometimes you can just call things classic. Like I had a coffee this morning that was classic. So I could talk
classic
about my
norm.
coffee.
Classic norm.
It's classic me.
The whole
Anyway,
definition of classic norm. One of my favorite comedians, I don't know if you know or even care much for him, is Norm Macdonald. Have you
yep,
ever heard of him? Yeah,
yeah, he just died.
exactly. So it was it was a sad week in a way. I mean, I obviously don't know the person, but I thought I really liked Norm Macdonald, and yeah, kind of sorry that he's passed. So I've been watching a lot of Norm videos this week. Not you,
Fair enough.
although it's good to see you as well.
This proves my theory that everyone named Norman is either weird, old, or dead.
You do
It
get a
just adds.
good series of very interesting people called Norm. Yeah. Not saying, I enjoy spending time with you, not just because of your name, but also the content that you and the ideas that you bring forward. But
But
there is
mostly it's
something
my
about
name.
people, Norm. Yeah, ever since the Normans conquered the British Isles, something
Yeah,
has
I
been
remember that.
cooking. You've had something to do with that.
Yeah, Normans share these stories with each other. As we age, we get the Book of Normans.
The
We
Book
talk
of
about how
Normans.
we. It's like Book of Mormon, Part Two, Book of Normans.
That's a good name.
Yeah,
The Book
yeah.
of Normans. Have you ever been
Anyway,
to Normandy, by the way?
yeah, I was. I was several times actually.
Were you kind of a
It's
celebrity there, or
no, I wasn't greeted with flowers or gold coins or anything I expected, anything I deserved. So it
it
was a
was more
nice
like
place
a
anyway.
D-Day? Did you land on the beaches, or how did you take it by storm, or were you?
There was definitely a storm. I don't think I took anything other than just a few euros and to buy some coffee. That's really it.
I hope
My
you had an umbrella.
no, yeah, my Normandy story is much more bougie and predictable than the D-Day was.
Chips, uh, good chips and coffee and stuff like that.
Yeah, more or less. Anyway, shall we jump in today's topic?
From the Las Vegas of Europe to the Las Vegas of the US.
Yes, correct. In I guess have you seen the clips I sent you?
The one, no, I actually haven't. Sorry.
That's all right. That's all good. So I guess
Tell
this
me.
will surprise you somewhat. So imagine you have a lawyer. I don't know if you have a lawyer, but for a second, imagine.
I have used legal advice in the past, and I've always regretted it.
Brilliant. So you have a legal advisor with you, and the legal advisor says, Raz, I need you to buy a very, very fast car. As your lawyer, I advise you to buy a very, very fast car. Pack it up with every drug you find, and then hit it to Las Vegas while consuming those drugs. Is this a legal advice you would take?
Depends on the context. I'm not big on drugs, so I would be quite afraid of following advice unless as I said before, my experience with lawyers has been that they often give very very sound advice, but it's not stuff that I couldn't find by myself,
Yeah.
and often they
It
charge you a lot of money for it. So
it it
tell me
sounds
more.
like you would.
I would probably
Yeah,
not
it
do
sounds
it.
like yeah, it sounds like you wouldn't take the lawyer's advice even if it would be a sound advice. So I guess the book itself is starts with this advice
I
and
just don't
how
trust people that have 200,000 of personal credit or debt. and then have to
Fair
work
enough.
billable hours to pay that back. Don't trust those people. Sorry, but
No,
go
but
ahead. No, so I'm really am interested.
this
Why
this
is
is
this
not in
happening? Why is this the context for this book?
this is not intended to be a rant about lawyers. I just thought this is a nice little icebreaker. So the book itself is about a journalist called Roll Duke and his lawyer called Gonzo, who decides to jump in to a car packed with drugs and head to Las Vegas to cover a motorcycle race and then a conference about drugs.
And by the way,
And
that's my only image of this topic, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, is effectively that scene with Johnny Depp high in the car, freaking out. Is it Goodman, the other actor that's playing the lawyer potentially?
I think it's
Um,
Benicio del Toro,
no,
but I
Benicio del
might be
Toro.
wrong.
Sorry, yeah,
Yeah.
that is
So
just insane. Keep
yeah,
going.
that's more or less what the movie and the book is about. We can wrap up. So essentially, yeah. So these guys are on drugs, and they're going to Las Vegas, and they are going through crazy stories. And I guess it's worth talking about how what other people think about Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas first, so that you can get a bit of an idea on how many layers of interpretation this story has. So most people I saw and I know hate it or love it. It is everyone seems to have a very strong opinion on the story itself, and
My gut feeling
ma-
is I don't like this book. That's why, or even the movie was very hard to digest, even those few sequences that I watched. But
okay,
keep
okay,
going, keep going. I
fair
just
enough.
wanted to tell you which camp I'm in before.
That's okay. We are all in that camp one day, and then we convert. so, so the story, the book is written in the style of Gonzo. Gonzo is a very, I guess, subjective form of journalism that was developed and described by Hunter S. Thompson, who is the writer of the book. And just to give you an idea on the importance of Gonzo, never after Hunter S. Thompson there was really anyone who managed to do a good Gonzo book. Not that they haven't tried, it's just they never really managed to. Even Hunter S. Thompson himself never really produced anything else that is considered to be a Gonzo masterpiece. So this is really the only book that's relevant here. So there's a reason for this being the only book because most of the book is nonsense. Most of the book is very difficult to follow, and that gives many people incredible levels of hate towards the story. Yet, many people consider it a modern classic. Now, before I go into why it's considered a modern classic, it's worth noting that the book is more or less just two guys high on drugs, right? It's about them slowly digesting, inhaling, injecting, snorting, whatever form, whatever shape you can do the drugs, and then moving forward with their life. The story is centered around the motorbike race and a police conference, but you barely really see or understand much of that. It's not really the point, right? The most visual part that stuck with me from the movie was actually a scene in the hotel where Johnny Depp, the main character, the actor who is playing the main character, is lying on a half-burned bed, shaking of fear that the lawyer, his friend lawyer, is going to jump out at him with a knife and stab him. Then goes out and fights with the local maid from the hotel and sprinkles acid mixed with vitamin C drink onto the walls. So you can imagine it's a pretty chaotic book. But why do people call it classic, right? Because what's the point? I think I think in many ways this is a classic, same way as let's say Catcher in the Rye is a classic or King Pest from Edgar Allan Poe is classic. It kind of leans back towards a sense of a zeitgeist changing. I'm not really sure if it's worth defining zeitgeist, but I mean the sense of an age, the idea on what's going on right now and where our society is and what is the direction we are heading to. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is coming from a author who was all in the 60s, not necessarily part of the hippie movement, but very much supportive of it. Both the hippie movement, both the idealism that came with it. He describes this feeling in the book as, you know, not really knowing what's going on, but having the sense that you are in the right place and you are making history. And the main character of the book is speeding through history. Well, mostly just speeding through speed, the drug. But, in a sense, you're kind of like getting the idea that maybe there's something more underlying in it. And what I always thought the book was genius is at, is the moment of lucidity that the main character displays. So, in the midst of all the crazy shit that's going on around them, there's a moment when he kind of just stops, looks at the audience, and says, "We are all royally fucked, aren't we?" I'm paraphrasing here because he doesn't say these words, but he does discuss how, the system that he is so against it, and Hunter S. Thompson, the writer, was very much anti-establishment, is closing in and will devour them very, very soon. And I guess in that sense, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is both a story of a zeitgeist that's about to change, and is a book of identity crisis for that generation. It's the realization that all that thing that you believed in, the direction you thought we are all going to, is not going to happen, and there's something else coming. He doesn't say it's necessarily bad, but he's a pretty staunch liberal, and he's all about taking drugs and having freedom, shooting guns as well. He seemed to be very much into guns. Fun fact: when he died, he was the author. When he died, he asked Johnny Depp to shoot his ashes out of a cannon, which actually happened. His ashes were shot out from a cannon. Apparently, it cost like $3 million. It's an amazing way to have your funeral. But anyway,
Just for a bullet.
yeah. And to be honest, when I first read the book, I hated it. And I'm not saying I like it now, but I do recognize that there's some genius about it. In a way, if you want to be really political, right? This was written in the midst of the Vietnam War, and the idealism that was described there was the sense, the justice that people wanted in Vietnam as well. And in a way, this kind of profits the failure that war will bring and the crisis that will trigger. I'm not saying Hunter S. Thompson was necessarily a prophet here. I think he just captured that idea, that sense of changing winds. And I guess that's kind of like where I'm at.
Hmm.
It Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is really about, in my opinion, about an identity crisis. It's in many ways I tie it back to your Dostoevsky books. How in Crime and Punishment, for example, the main character followed and excuse me, followed and believed in in the Napoleonic freedom that you can do whatever you want, and certain people are above the law, or certain people can be above the law. It's just a better way to frame it. But in the end, his own guilt devours him, right? There isn't much guilt in this book, but it does showcase a very similar pattern in how the story goes. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I was listening intently and very carefully. I find the topic fascinating. I had both some observations and some questions, if you want just
Sure.
to develop that. Because, first of all, you mentioned a little bit about gonzo journalism, and I had never heard about it before.
Yeah.
So I just quickly went to Wikipedia and just to get the definition. So it's a style of journalism that is written without claims of objectivity, often including the reporter as part of the story, using a first-person narrative. The first, the word gonzo is believed to have been first used in 1970 to describe an article by Hunter S. Thompson, who
Correct.
popularized the style. It's an energetic first person participatory writing style in which the author is a protagonist, and it draws its power from a combination of social critique and self satire. So, kind of
Yeah.
just to frame that, and effectively, what Thompson says in the Rolling Stone in '73 is that if I'd written the truth I knew for the past 10 years, About 600 people, including me, would be rotting in prison cells from Rio to Seattle today. Absolute truth is very rare and dangerous commodity in the context of professional journalism. To
Yeah,
your earlier point about a certain the zeitgeist of the time of the 70s. And then I thought, to put this in context, so this book was written in 1971.
correct.
So 2 years after the landing on the moon, and 1 year before the oil price shocks, right, of the 70s, the hyperinflation, the Vietnam War starting around that same time, and well,
It was in the middle of the Vietnam War. Vietnam War ended in 75, so it was about 4 years before.
So right at the peak when I
Yeah.
guess things changed, right? And people from 69, where people were thinking about progress, limitless productivity gains, the Jetsons, and so on, with the harsh reality of kind of a war that is losing its cause. I guess the U.S. wasn't necessarily winning, and it was taking a lot of lives and taking center stage in the political movement. Meanwhile, you had all this withdrawal, right, into hippies, Orientalism to some extent on one hand, and kind of this how do you want to call this, the zeitgeist that this book is capturing. Definitely, there's definitely a lot of drugs involved, sort of dissolution with everything, and kind of an exploration of pure emotions, right, to some extent, because all drugs ultimately, that's what they offer, is kind of a raw engagement with your core feelings, whether it's the highest or the lowest. So interesting. I understand the relevance of this book in that context. And what were you saying about freedom? So are you saying the book is a manifesto for freedom, or on
In
the
a way,
contrary?
no, it's in a way it is. I mean, Hunter himself was very much into freedom. He probably would be considered to be a gun-toting liberal, and he was, very anti-establishment. He was all about the American dream, the idea that you can work really hard and achieve anything. I think in many ways he was a bit idealistic, and that, just to go back to the gonzo journalism as well, I don't know if it was him or someone else that said that sometimes a good fiction is better than reality, which I think was, the way he related to gonzo as being a way to describe reality without describing reality. I mean, as long as you don't mind completely missing out on the motorcycle race, it is a very good cover on the motorcycle race, right? So yeah, he was very much into freedom, and I think the establishment here was the police, the anti-drug campaigns. Not to say it is all about drugs. Hunter himself was often very sober, and he said it as well, that he wrote the book very sober, like he didn't actually take any drugs, but he took drugs before, during the trip, that he kind of like translated into this book. So a lot of things that happen in this book actually happened.
So
And
what
yeah,
actually
so
happens in this book? So we spoke about why this book was written. We
yeah,
spoke about a little bit of kind of what happens, who the characters are. Is there is there any narrative, or is it just one big trip?
it is one big trip. There is some narrative. I think, I don't know how the best way to describe it, right? It I start try to think about alternative stories. That's why I brought Catcher in the Rye and King Pest, right? Catcher in the Rye is about this awkward kid who is kind of just drifting along, and nothing really happens in the book, but when you read it, you get a sense that, there's something wrong. That,
Mm.
besides his own complaints, besides his own problems, there is something else brewing there. And have you read the book? Have you read
I've
Catcher in
read
the
The
Rye?
Catcher in the Rye, and I actually
Yeah,
have opinions about it. The other one I
sure.
haven't read.
So King Pest is like a short novel by Edgar Allan Poe, and it's not as punchy. It's more like a horror story, but the idea is that two sailors sneak into a warehouse trying to escape from the police and meet this and joins this massive party, and the party goes completely out of hand. Right, it's an insane party, and they start to fight with each other, and everyone's completely nuts. And in the very end, when they get out, they realize that they were in a plague quarantine, and everyone in the warehouse who were partying were dying. That was their last party, so they were going really hard. But this also means that they have the plague now, most likely. And I guess the best way I would tie it back to is the main story is not really what it is about, but what is underlying there. Like, I thought about alternatives where fear and loathing in medieval age, right? And fear and loathing in medieval age would be a massive party in the castle with the royals and the king and the aristocrats, just doing the craziest shit you remember. But in the midst there, all the noise going on, coming in from outside, implying that there's like a peasant rebellion that's about to break through and kill all of them, right? But you never read that bit. You just read the party. So it,
1789, Marie Antoinette is enjoying her cake,
yeah, yeah,
doing drugs,
essentially
and
that.
involved in all sorts of orgies. And meanwhile, the people are at the gates of Versailles.
Yeah, absolutely. And, shit is about to go down, but you're not really looking at that revolutionary moment because, in many ways it kind of goes against our main character's intention. Like, there isn't anything happy for the two main characters in the story. And yeah, it's just they're searching for the American dream and slowly realizing that it is over, or well, in their mindset obviously is over. What American dream is can be seen differently. There's
Do,
a
do, you,
very
do,
good
you, do
line.
you get a sense of what the American dream means to them?
I think for to them it sounds like something that the idea that you work really hard and you can achieve anything, and that you're getting good things out of it. It's not only that there's opportunity. This isn't only about opportunity, but also there's a good opportunity to
Mm.
achieve good things. And there's a really good
It's
line.
basically like the Australian dream, right? We everybody gets a fair go is the Australian dream, and it's kind of the same
Everyone
idea.
dreams. I guess one way to look at it is what would be today's fear and loading, right? What would be the big zeitgeist changing moment here that would make us realize that, look, whatever we are doing is not going to lead anywhere good. And I'm thinking COVID could have changed a lot of the perspective, but hopefully that will be over in a year or two. But then who knows? Maybe there will be something else, right?
Yeah, I was just reading about this and watching videos on this. I think it's great to touch upon the point. How is this book still a classic? What is it still relevant about it? Because it does capture a fracture, right, in something between two ages, two zeitgeists. One of the American dream, the other one is the dissolution of and the depression of, what effectively of the 70s and the shift towards um, I guess whatever you want to call that, hippie
Yeah,
movement, anti-war, um, maybe socialism, anarchist to some extent. And then in the 80s, it kind of rebounded a little bit, but it was driven a lot
yeah.
by deregulation. But
It
nonetheless,
is
like,
disillusionment. Yeah, yeah.
so I
Go
think
for it.
ultimately that's what I love about this. I think that's a very good point is how, what would this book look like if it was written today?
Mm.
And you mentioned
Well,
COVID. What are the institutions that are breaking up, that are part of the old promise, that are now no longer valid? I liked your point about so the COVID part. I think reflected a little bit. For instance, the inflation around education. I felt right. So the
yeah,
fact that you have to get a degree, I know this is applicable more in the U.S. where people get indebted for life. It
yeah,
cannot be wiped up from with bankruptcy, and then they become kind of servants, not really paying off this compounding debt, which actually happens also in Anglo-Saxon countries here to some extent in New Zealand and Australia. And then actually the education they get does not really offer them the high employment, so the well-paid employment that back in the 60s or 50s with the baby boomers allowed one single person effectively to support a whole household, right? With potentially three kids and a non-working spouse that looked after the kids. So that
sure,
quality of life was kind of given to them through the productivity that had reached kind of a peak, I think, in the 70s, where that no longer applied, unemployment and so on. And I think that's, if you take a step back and you think about human progress and the I'm taking more of an economic point of view now, and the fact that we live in a digital world that is supposedly unleashing so much productivity, right? However, here we are kind of in this real estate bubble, asset bubble. Two people working, hard to get onto the property ladder. You can see why, and COVID taking away your income, right? And everywhere in the world, kind of, if you don't have any form of welfare, putting you at jeopardy, like literally from a survival point of view. Kind of it's interesting to imagine and to question again the promise of kind of a better world. But what other institutions come to mind? So I think anything that's kind of brick and mortar to some extent seems suddenly very passe, right? I don't know. I just feel like
Yeah.
this whole shift.
Well,
Here we are having a podcast, right? We are not actually sitting to. I'm not saying that human interaction is outdated. I just think that there's something that's kind of different right now about people interacting that will probably never come back to fully. But I feel also people that are more siloed than before. Maybe there's a breakdown of human interaction through COVID that didn't exist before.
yeah, I mean, this all could be, part of it, right? It's hard to say anything concrete, firstly because I'm not a prophet, and secondly because I will just come across like a fearmonger, right? It's uh, with terms of disillusionment, I actually don't know how to pronounce that word.
Yeah,
Disillusionment, I guess.
it's a tough word.
So yeah, it's hard. We are learning something today. I think I think in terms of, like, you could see like what do people believe in? What is that they think will lead to the right things? Like, is it about an institution, someone doing the right choice? Is it about, the belief, then the trust we have in our peers? Is it something around family or education or work? This all could be dialed back to and essentially boiled down to something like fear and loathing. And yeah, and then I guess you have to deal with the idea that, drugs themselves is not really the most important bit about fear and loathing. It's something completely different. So, the way you frame that could be very, very different as well.
Mm. I
I
mean,
don't
on
know
the
if
drugs part, I just think that, drugs were effectively a medium to speed up sort of aspects of human existence, right? And especially from an artistic point of view. I mean, it was definitely the
yeah
case in the 70s that everybody was doing drugs, from the Beatles to whoever, politicians potentially. But the just it speeds up, right? The narrative process, right? Because now you're exploring pure emotion, and one thing that drugs are really
yeah
good at is kind of exacerbating that emotion. If you just look at alcohol, you're
yeah
sad, you drink it, you get completely depressive. If you're excited, happy, it makes you more happy. Cocaine, amazing dopamine hits. Not that I would know, and you
I'll
keep
clip this
going.
out of context, Raz. We'll put it on TikTok. Cocaine, great. Classic.
Opioids, pure sugar, pleasure.
Do drugs, kids.
Give me another one. You say the drug, I'll give you the tagline.
Yeah, yeah. I think, now that I think about it, maybe it's. Oh God, I forgot it. Oh God, because you started
Do
sending
you
me
want me to
down that path.
keep
No, no,
going? Meth.
no. Yeah, it just
Let me
no.
see. Good, good substitute for heroin. I've heard from psychiatrists trying to wean people off heroin addiction.
Yeah,
Some drugs
no,
are
that's
actually
that's fine. I'm
positive.
thinking. I'm not necessarily thinking about drugs, but I guess I guess maybe like social values could be another breakdown where, people just when we see that with politically, like how divided some countries are, some of them more than others,
Hmm.
and how that creates like a new sense of, I guess,
Yeah, I mean the West was quite
divide between
Christian,
people.
right? And then you had this move into either sort of materialism, atheism, or a reversion back to. That's when kind of the New Age thing started, right? With Buddhism and Orientalism coming into Europe, and you had a withdrawal into that, and spiritualism, which came with the hippie movement, because the old world was dead to some extent, because people didn't believe
Yeah,
the dogmas and the orthodoxies of the past. You had it with relationships, right? Because back until the hippie movement, like late 60s. You still had the traditional family, right, with
Yeah.
the potentially this woman being at home with the children. Very, people didn't really get that many divorces. There was a lot of societal pressure on those sort of customs, and all of a sudden things open up, and the modern family kind of starts at least transforming, if not breaking down a little bit.
Yeah, I guess you know what I realized what I wanted to say as what you're saying actually makes sense. I guess in terms of morality or even religion, there's definitely a break and a paradigm shift. And in terms of, I guess what I was thinking about is something along the lines of Parasite. You remember the movie Parasite? If you've seen it,
I've read so
it
many reviews of it. I have not seen it.
anyway, the long story short, I'm not going to spoil it, but long story short, it's about class differences, right? It's about how the divide between classes in a modern society is actually increasing, and how people in the upper class get it, don't get what's going on below them, and even if they are good guys, they're just so detached from the general idea on what's going on among poor people that creates this incredibly weird situations. And in many ways, over past 10, 20 years, we've seen much higher social mobility. I mean, even today we can see how people go on TikTok, go on YouTube, and they can earn thousands, if not millions of dollars, and become celebrities. But then
I think you're
is this
describing two different aspects. So I think the traditional economy is definitely creating more winners and losers because the rate of growth has diminished from the 60s to now. And as I was saying earlier, this is kind of a Peter Thiel idea, very libertarian idea. So Peter Thiel, if you don't know, is kind of the founder of PayPal, more on the he's gay but a conservative,
Mhm.
very much a libertarian, and I mean, he's really calling out. He's a contrarian, so he's calling out actually that the rate of growth should be even higher. That the reason why
Yeah.
we have strife today is not because we're not growing, but we're not growing fast enough. There's not enough productivity in the middle class level for people to actually catch up, and then you see this discrepancy. People are being left behind. Effectively, it's not so much that the people at the
Yeah.
top should be punished or taxed or something, but it just really the growth is not enabling everyone to grow the same way, and the only means of accumulating capital in this game, as we both know, is kind of you get into property potentially as a middle
Yeah.
class person, and then maybe you have a chance of accumulating some capital. Otherwise, you don't have any savings left at the end of this game, and so everybody kind of this is the core problem. Peter Thiel idea, and then sorry, I lost my train of thought there, but um,
We're
as
talking
well.
about class differences
Yeah.
and how
So the
yeah.
second point that you mentioned, this is kind of the problem, and then the other problem, or maybe part of the solution to some extent, is technology usually, from what I know, creates a form of democracy. So the fact that TikTok or whatever podcasting comes into play enables ordinary people with not so many skills access to something that maybe 10, 20 years ago you'd only have some David Letterman show doing, right? That cost millions and millions of dollars. It was a bottleneck for
Mhm.
advertising. That was the only place where you could be seen, where advertisers were putting money into. Now, all of a sudden, the internet is allowing for everybody to be a content creator and also an advertiser
Yeah.
medium.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying.
So the
What I would challenge it with, I'm obvious. I'm not necessarily saying this is true. I'm just saying like this is how I imagine the fear and loathing framework here. Is what if technology doesn't democratize? What if it divides us even more? What if the people that were already rich and famous get even more rich and famous using the technology? Although not the same, traditional faces, but someone that might have that background already, right? So
Mhm.
you could, and again, I don't cannot give you examples. It's just really just a food for thought.
I think I see your point, and maybe there's different types of technology that we should distinguish. Again, I'm drawing from Peter Thiel's ideas a little bit. I'm still trying to digest this myself, but what I think what I'm getting is that there's definitely a lot of innovation in the world of bits, but is this truly creating a lot of productivity for the world? The fact that we are sitting here talking, is that actually increasing the GDP of our country and creating more wealth? Or do we need a different type of innovation and technology, more not in the world of bits and information, but in the world of atoms and actually knowing how to do shit and
Yeah.
get it done. Repairing a roof, fixing a pipe, uh, creating renewable energy that's cheaper than oil and not subsidized by governments. Um, that's really the crux of it, right? And those
Yeah.
two are kind of different. And the first one is great, but it's not enough. And you kind of need innovation in the world of atoms to for these. So a lot of the intrinsic problems of our society to at least have a chance of being solved.
We are drifting into some very deep philosophical questions, so I think we can wrap this up before we go on for another hour.
So give me the
But have
pitch.
we?
Give me the pitch on this book. So
That's the pitch.
why did you bitch? No, and give me the bitch. Why did you
The
want to
book
talk
is
about
a
this book?
bitch.
The book is a bitch. It's a bitch. That movie is a bitch to watch.
Yes.
It's absolutely a stream of consciousness, exacerbated by visuals that make you feel like you're on mushrooms,
Yeah.
effectively the whole way.
It is. It
It
is. It is
provokes
very
nausea just
disorienting.
watching it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very disorienting. Yeah. I mean, it's a unique experience, right? Just like drugs. Well, you take them and you remember them.
You feel
It's
like you're on drugs and you don't even have to do them by reading this book, but it takes you through
yeah.
the journey.
Oh, 100%. Look, I think, the way I see it, I learned two things about this. One, don't take legal advice, like, ever.
Ah, so
And
you do
two,
agree with me.
I do. And two, I guess, drugs are fun to an extent.
There might be some consequences, but enjoy the ride.
Yeah. So what's your conclusion on Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas?
No, I love it. I think you've ended really well. I Be careful what you wish for. Be careful what you try. There will be consequences, and I think a lot of those emotions that you will be experiencing through that are valid, and they might be bigger than yourself.
Yeah.
You might be tapping into the zeitgeist of our world, and if you ride the wave well, not saying you should. But if you are indeed tapping into something higher than yourself through whatever experience, hopefully it'll take you to potentially some real good answers. You just gotta
Yeah,
find the
absolutely.
questions first. This book is definitely raising a lot of questions.
Would you read it?
I'm gonna look into it and maybe get it on Kindle first,
Yeah.
low investment, and then and check it out.
Look, I don't know if this helps or not, but the book itself is relatively short, right? I think the author himself realized that it is more or less unbearable to read it. So I think he kept it fairly
It
brief.
was a spasm of creativity. It was
Oh,
like
yeah, absolutely.
like a headless chicken, basically.
That's how you will feel after reading it. Anyway, this wraps up our discussion for today.